First of all, you're all very welcome. Thank you very much for being here in attendance at the talk today about putting ethics into practice. VII Insider is hosting this event, and that's made possible in partnership with PhotoWings. So thank you very much to PhotoWings for sponsoring this event. Just a reminder to everybody in attendance, you're very welcome to ask questions. It's most helpful if you can pop all your questions into the Q&A box. That'll just be where I'll be looking for questions. It's easier to keep track of them in the Q&A box. So if you could do that, that would be great. And then last but not least, we're very pleased today to be able to be joined by Shaminder Dulai, who is a visual journalist, photo editor, and producer. So thanks very much, Shaminder. I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Good morning, everyone. First, let me just start off by saying, I'm really honored to be here. I'm really grateful for the invitation to spend this morning with everyone here. Thanks to Savannah and Seven and everyone listening in to make the time. Ethics is just one of those topics that I feel like we don't ever get enough of a chance to really dive into. So I'm really looking forward to this next hour. So let's talk about it. So what are ethics? Like, how do you put them into practice? Ethics as a topic, it can sometimes be a little nebulous, and depending on who you ask, where you work, the type of assignment you're on, or even the area you're working in, the answer to like what are ethics can be very different. And to me, ethics are kind of like a code or a set of guiding principles. But before I should actually back up. So before I get ahead of myself, let me just share you the perspective that I'm coming from, because it'll make sense in a moment why my perspective matters. Basically, it's what I'm bringing to the table, and it shapes how I understand and interpret ethics. And as we'll talk about later, ethics is a very fluid thing that is very unique to a bunch of stuff that makes up the idea of ethics. So when I talk about ethics, I'm speaking from the perspective of a photojournalist, a filmmaker, and editor who also works in the United States. So what that means is I'm very familiar with the U.S. media laws, our customs in the U.S., and I might be working in a slightly different model than someone coming from a different background and perspective. This is actually the key point. So ultimately, what we do is subjective in some nature due to this. It's some part of our trainings, our personal experience, and a lot of learning firsthand that guides us. So for instance, I might say that photographing someone in public isn't a legal question, but more of an ethical question. But like someone living in Paris might say, no, I disagree with you. It is also a legal question because there are different privacy laws there. So, you got to kind of understand where people are coming from, because ethics are not like one version for the whole globe set in stone. And then there's like sometimes people who are working in the commercial space where there's a whole different rule about photographing in public, right? There's a whole different legality to it. So understanding like where someone is coming from is kind of key to understanding why you might believe what you believe or the perspective you're taking on ethics. So let me kind of, with that in mind, let's kind of reframe this concept of what are ethics. So where do we start? So I think just as in the work we do, where we try to understand the angles and nuances within a story we produce in order to be a better journalist, we must also step back and acknowledge that ethics are similarly fluid and require unpacking of nuance and sometimes larger context. We may also acknowledge that based on who is looking at the question of ethics and the perspectives they bring to them, that the conclusions may be different. I think often we try to think of ethics as a binary, like this is right, that's wrong. You're bad if you do this, I'm right if I do this. But the reality is it's more of a fallacy to think that way. I think it helps to think of ethics as providing guidance. but they aren't like black and white, like a light switch. There's no on and off to them. So what are ethics, right? That takes us back to that main question that we're kind of exploring in these chats. And like I said, to me, they're more like rules. I'm sorry, they're not really rules. They're more like a code or a policy for best practices. And their goal is to help us start to ask the right questions and address our blind spots. They're constantly in flux and they aren't written in stone. They are a starting point to thinking critically about our work and the impact it can have on others. They give us and our peers a common language to discuss how we produce visual journalism, the goals and responsibilities that come with picking up a camera, and the impacts of our work on others. And one way to think about this now is, or I was trying to think about in preparation for this chat today, of like, okay, so what is ethics then? What makes up ethics? What are the parts of ethics? How do we even know this is what we call ethics? And so I kind of came up with this idea of the three ingredients of ethics. And I think sometimes it's easy to throw out the idea that visual ethics, throw out the idea of visual ethics and think everyone knows what you're talking about and that we're all in agreement on what they are. But I think to really understand ethics, we have to look at it as fluid first, and then assuming that, ask why are they fluid and not binary? And what are the parts of that equation that make up ethics? So speaking really broadly, I kind of came up with this idea of these three buckets that things live in, where there's personal ethics that you bring with you, and that's like your background, your education, your culture, like the things that you have learned that this is right and that is wrong, right? That's your personal ethics. Then there's newsroom client side ethics. That's the employer you might work for, a client who hires you for an assignment, maybe a nonprofit you're working with that has a slightly different idea of ethics, and understanding what is their version of ethics, what are their newsroom norms. And then there's this idea of industry ethics. Now, this is like across an industry, like for photojournalism in the US, there's a group called NPPA, which has a code of ethics that a lot of journalists working for daily newspapers use. And that becomes kind of like your industry ethics, where you have this common language and understanding of, what are the quote unquote right and wrong things to do. And I think all of these three things kind of come together in like multiple pieces of a larger puzzle. And there's nuance in each one. And understanding all three and how they differ and how they are sometimes in conflict is key to understanding the fluid nature of ethics and the larger need to always be reevaluating, questioning, and discussing ethics. What happens when your personal ethics run into conflict with your newsroom ethics? So, like, for instance, I'll give you an example. Most newsrooms have a policy about gifts. If you're offered something while on assignment, you're supposed to decline because we don't want to give the impression that our reporting was compromised by someone giving us something. Some places have limits. Some places say, nothing over $25 in value. Some other places say no value at all, but it's okay to accept a ride to a location with someone you're working with, but don't let them pay for lunch. Don't accept a cup of coffee. Pretty straightforward stuff. And the whole point of it is that this is the newsroom's ethical policy to say we need to protect the integrity of the journalism, and so this is what they've come up with. Now, let me throw a little wrench into this example. And it's an example from something that happened to me where my cultural norms and personal ethics kind of ran into conflict with newsroom ethics. So at this point, I'm working for a daily newspaper in the US, and the policy of the newspaper is don't even accept a cup of coffee. Even that is interpreted as a gift. If you're on assignment, you don't do it. You don't introduce any questioning into like what you're doing there, how much that coffee swayed your opinions on the person you're talking to. The issue I ran into, though, is that, so I'm Indian and I'm visiting an Indian person's home for this assignment I was working on. And it's a custom to offer visitors a cup of tea when they come to your home. And I know this. And as an Indian person, I know that if I don't accept that cup of tea, it's going to be viewed as an insult. It's going to put them off. It's going to make people feel uncomfortable. It's going to just change everything. And so I have this conflict, right? Like, what do I do? My newsroom says, don't do it. My personal ethics I'm bringing to the table say, this is actually not a big deal. This is the cultural norm. It's showing respect. It's showing that, I accept their invitation, that I'm in their home. They accept me to talk to me. It's going to help everything. And it's not going to compromise the journalism in any way, because that cup of tea is not going to sway me in any direction. Also, I don't even like tea, but I still accept it because, that's the expectation there. So I'm looking at these three buckets of ethics, and in combination, now you can see how it is very fluid, right? Like there is a larger picture here that I have to navigate in this particular situation. And the ethics are what I turn to find the words to explain why I should accept the tea, why it doesn't compromise me. How do I be transparent with my editor when I get back to the newsroom to say, hey, this happened. I want you to know this is how I handled it. This is why I handled it that way. We need that common kind of language that our ethics provide so that we can have that discussion. And maybe it's a little overkill to even have that discussion. It might be like, well, that's not anything. But to be transparent, like you want to offer it up to your editor. You don't want your editor to be caught off guard and then wondering like, well, why'd you do that? Like, why didn't you tell me about it? So part of that is also just kind of finding the language so that you can put it in the context of, why this is not an ethical breach. So with that in mind, it's like ethics are really a living thing. That's kind of when I say that they're fluid, they're in flux, they're changing. They are a living thing, and they evolve over time as new information is learned. And ethics are both written and firm, do not lie, but also unwritten and fluid, do not harm. What is harm? What does harm mean? Harm who? How do you decide when it's okay to harm? Are there degrees of harm? What does the responsibility of journalism override the need not to harm? Does it ever override it? So it becomes very fluid, right? It's not very much binary of on and off. There's nuances within it. And so the ethics are a way to start that conversation, to start asking those questions and start engaging in those discussions that need to happen so that you can get to the better outcomes. So, think of visual ethics like a toolkit. They help us ask the right questions, but they are not rules. And I think what I like to do is I use these tools, like I said, to engage with my peers so we have a common language. And that helps us keep evolving as well, because the more we talk about these things, the better we get at them, the more nuances we bring to it. We think about things about representation, about how our images impact other people, about cultural norms, about how we approach not othering people. All that stuff is built into ethics. But if you look at a code of ethics, the way a lot of them are written today, they don't actually specifically call these things out because they're meant to be broad for a reason. Like I said, it's a starting point. It's not a be all end all. There's also, like I said, there's also that other reason about that ethics are important, and that is it reinforces the public trust in our news gathering and reporting. So at the end of the day, trust and credibility is all we have if you're doing journalism. And I'm speaking from the journalist perspective because remember I mentioned at the top, that's where I'm coming from. And trust and credibility is a thing that is very, very hard to earn and very, very easy to lose. And so that is why a lot of places use an ethics code, because this is worth preserving, because once it's gone, it is gone and it does not come back easily. So in the US, I can only speak from my experience. And we've had a long history of supporting journalists and the right of the press, both domestic and foreign, but also that isn't always true anymore, unfortunately. So right now we're smack dab in the middle of a period where we're openly attacking not just our work, but the people who do the work. The journalists themselves have become not just acceptable to attack, but encouraged to attack them. And fake news is the banner that led this charge and cast journalists as the enemy. And in this world, it's our ethics that are our greatest weapon. This is the best way we have to respond to these attacks, in my mind. So for every bad actor attempting to provide a misleading source, manipulating a news gatherer into a photo op, or reframing our work with a misleading headline, it's our ethics that we fall back on to help us find the ways to start these discussions, to find the language that we can share with our editors and our peers so we can start addressing these things. And not just guiding like how we do our work, but more so how we talk about and educate the public as well on what we do, why we do what we do, and how the public then can verify what we report, because the public is who we serve. They're a partner in this. And I think that is sometimes the missing ingredient in all this. So in my mind, the greatest weapon we have is the truth, but the truth is kind of tricky. Not knowing how to articulate the truth and what we do leaves the door open for others to interpret our intentions and perhaps twist them. That's how we end up with viral images of a shark in floodwaters after a hurricane. I've noticed this image like every year since the first time I saw it, which was in Hurricane Sandy in New York City in 2012. And when this picture was circulating that time, everyone was saying, oh, yeah, this is real. This happened in Manhattan. And a lot of people started to believe it. There's a freeway that runs through New York called the BQE. And if you look at this picture, you're like, oh, yeah, that kind of looks like the BQE. Maybe it happened. And there was a lot of flooding. And so naturally, people started to think it was real. The problem is this same image keeps showing up every time there's a flood in a major city. And the origin of this picture is actually from 2005. It's a picture from a magazine that was talking about scientists studying sharks off the coast of South Africa. So what someone did was just clone that shark out of there and put it in this other frame. And that keeps circulating now every year. And we saw it as recently as the recent floods in New York, where this picture was circulating yet again. And people were thinking, oh, yeah, that's real. And so like this is kind of the types of things that we're up against where, you might think, oh, ethics aren't really just about this kind of stuff. It's more about in the gathering and how you're conducting yourself. But ethics also applies to this because this is a situation where we can use our ethics to find the language to educate the public on media literacy. And like, how do you interpret images like this? And how do you give people the tools to verify on their own or to give them the thread that they can pull on to follow and find out that, oh no, this photo is actually from 2005. And how do you start these conversations in your newsrooms to say, if we don't do this, the whole foundation starts to crumble. Like that's my perspective on it. Because I think it's all important because it's not just about the way we intend our work to be seen, but it's the whole package across the industry. It's the intention versus interpretation. And if people start to doubt the authenticity of our images across the board, then it's very easy to dismiss anything we're creating as fake news. I know I'm getting into a little bit of a tangent, but I will bring it home. Trust me. Yeah. So more recently, we're also seeing other images like with the Israeli-Hamas crisis that's going on right now. There's a lot of fabricated misinformation images out there as well. Like there's older photos taken from other parts of the world that are being paired with new headlines and presented as fact. And it's motivate. You can question the motivations, but the impacts are misinformation takes hold. It muddies the water. It makes it harder for people to figure out what is real and what is fake. And it makes all of our jobs a lot harder because then people start doubting what we're doing. So in each of these cases, there is both the need of journalists to use their ethics to call out misinformation, but also to find the words to provide media literacy for the public to better share why ethics matter. When we talk about ethics, I feel like this is the real missing part of the equation that we never get into, is the media literacy component of it and how to better show the public what we do and why we do it. So, like I said, there's a couple of challenges that come with media literacy. There is trust erosion. With the fluid definition of media, this has led some in the public to conclude that journalists have an agenda and can't be trusted to tell the full story. So I personally kind of blame the blurring of the lines between news and opinion and the poor job our industry has done to make it clear when someone is commentary and something is straight reporting. But whatever the reason, like the outcome is always the same. And it doesn't matter if you're involved in that or not, it still impacts all of us. And second, I think the second category here is about social media and how it's made truth almost subjective and optional. So creating content, and I'm going to put that in quotes because I hate the word content. So creating content is treated as a means to an end for engagement. And engagement is the only metric that matters. So it doesn't really matter if something is true or not. This idea shapes how the public views the role of media and how media is produced. A fake social video that has high engagement is no less right or wrong than a factual video of a news event. And when you start recalibrating like how you view media, by extension, how you view journalists, this all gets lumped together and it becomes the fact for how media works. Then there's also the third category of the unresolved tension between AI tools and image making. That's really fundamentally starting to ask us really fundamental questions about what is photography? What does it represent? What is the value of it? And I'm sure all of you have gone online where you've seen comments of people saying, well, why can't we just tell AI to make that for us? Or if we don't need somebody to go there. Some publications are already starting to do this actually, which is really concerning. they're presented as photo illustrations, so that's how you get around not misleading people. But the idea is that, why not just ask a computer to give you the image you have in your mind versus the reality of sending someone else to go get it. Yeah, so these are just some of the few challenges facing journalism today. And you might be asking again, like, how does all this fit into ethics? And so I think of it as like the part of the media literacy question is the ethics and how do we talk about it? So I think applying ethics here, it means that talking about the value of journalism and how to articulate why a fake social video or a news photo paired with a made-up headline or asking AI to make a picture to fit a narrative is just plain wrong. And it's not just wrong, it's also harmful and unacceptable for a functioning society. We have to ask about our ethics to empower a public to demand better and be more discerning in their media, to give them the tools to shift fact from fiction and build trust in our work. So when I ask why are ethics important, it's not just about how we behave in our jobs, it's also about the impact at work. It's also about the impact of our work and how it helps or harms others as well. So ethics helps us understand and articulate the principles and values of journalism to others. It's one thing to say, this happened, trust me. It's another thing to show that you understand the nuance of what happened, ask the important questions, vetted information to confirm it if it's true or not, talk to all the different voices that are part of the story, and then help people see how what you learned and how you learned what you learned and the context for why it matters and is relevant to them. With sound ethics underpinning this entire process, we build trust, reinforce best practices, and honor our responsibility to public and our peers in the industry who are trying to be good shepherds for journalism as well. So the responsibility of ethics is not just in the creating of the work, it's actually beyond ourselves. Today, everyone has a camera. There are billions of photos and hours of videos being shared every day. YouTube, TikTok, real and fake videos are out there circulating. There's AI images as well. And then there's trends like rage bait, which are just designed to upset you so that you do comment or you do tell somebody, hey, look how stupid this is. That's still engagement. It doesn't matter if it helped anything or if it's true or not. Engagement is all that matters. And the threat to journalism isn't that everyone is doing this. The threat is that they are changing the public perception of how media is created, and then by extension, how we as photographers and journalists conduct ourselves. So social media is training an entire generation that the ends justify the means, that this idea of engagement defined by likes, shares, fame, and eventually monetization is all that matters. It doesn't matter if a video is fake, you watched it. It doesn't matter that an image is fake, you shared it. In this model, truth can be a feeling or an emotion, and it can be subjective. And this further permeates into the zeitgeist. The more entrenched all of this becomes, that the notion of the media being subjective and you can't really, this is how media is made, therefore journalists also operate this way, therefore nothing can be trusted. That's the real danger. If people don't understand what we do, then they don't understand us or see the value in what we do. And it all starts to fall apart. And we're starting to see this take hold already. Social media is filled with comments of people questioning anything that disagrees as being fake or rage bait. Then you have, shortly after that will become governments that will start to ask questions of, should journalists be policed? How, do journalists have an agenda? Can they be trusted? Do we need to protect the journalists or put guardrails on journalism? And then you start to have debates about consent and filming. If you're starting to put limits on journalists, then you say, okay, well, can photographers now photograph in public spaces? Can they film the police? Can they attend a city hall meeting that we don't want them to be there at? And this all starts to become an open debate. And then lost in all of this will become this recognition of what we do, or if there's a public value to what we do, and should the press even be protected? So our ethics are our guiding principles, like I said, but they are just step one. We need to engage not just with our editors and colleagues, we need to do a better job of sharing these ethics publicly and pulling back the curtain on what we do. Hand in hand with this, there is also the need to understand how our images impact others. Images have the power to shape our understanding of the world. Our ethics must guide us to ask if our photographs are based on assumptions, Do they reinforce tropes and forms? Are they biased in a version of reality that doesn't actually match reality? It could be even simple things like innocuous tropes, like a woman in glasses being perceived as mousy or nerdy or shy. It's such a common trope, actually, that if I were to say to you, she's all that, if you're under 40, you're probably thinking of the movie right now. And you're probably thinking of that stereotype, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. It can also be harmful things, like even more harmful than that, such as portraying people from other countries as downtrodden or poor or the model minority. These visual cliches are built on stereotypes, harmless or not. They're based on a perceived truth rather than an actual truth. It's like so personally for me, like when I moved to Seattle about 3 years ago, and I was living in an apartment building, sight unseen. I just needed someone to stay, and everyone in the building would see me in the elevator, and they all assumed I worked at Amazon or Microsoft. Is that a harmful trope? It's not really the point. The issue here is that when people see me, there's an Indian man. This is kind of a nicer apartment. They just assume, wow, he must be here because of tech. So what are our visual shorthands? I think we all have them. We don't always examine them, but if you think about it, we all have certain compositions we go back to, certain ways we approach certain stories. There's an image that pops into our mind. I kind of go back to the cave theory with Plato's forms of there's a shadow on the wall that you think instantly like, oh, that's a cup, or oh, that's what that person looks like, or that's what that person should be doing. And we bring this with us. This is all stuff that, myself included, we all bring this to us. And this is some of the visual shorthands we're using without even thinking about it. So when we work on an assignment, we got to ask ourselves why we think what we think and what we think we actually know versus what is actually happening. Are we actually approaching the image we're making with a full understanding, or are we basing it on the assumptions that we bring with us? And the ethics is a tool to help us start that conversation internally. It could be an internal dialogue. No one has to know that you had a stereotype in your head. Like, I've been there, and the ethics are what helps us kind of unpack that and work through that. And you don't have to score any social media points about it. You don't have to feel embarrassed about it. But in the end, because you did that, you discovered something that you might have been doing unknowingly, or a behavior you were practicing unknowingly. And that is where the ethics can start that dialogue within us. So this practice of ethics and considering representation, having that good code of ethics gives us the means to have that internal dialogue in the moment. And then when you get back to your newsroom, when you try to talk to an editor or a peer who might not see it the same way you do, it also gives us those language and those tools to start that external conversation, with our editors, with our peers, with the public, but also with the people we're photographing. Like, if the most powerful thing you can do is tell somebody, I don't know, can you explain it? And like open that dialogue, invite that dialogue. And if you approach it this way, as this practice of my chief job is to be a learner, I'm in a position of power that gives me this ability to open doors and ask questions, but it also means I have this responsibility to understand the impact that my images can have on someone else, not just the people I'm working with, but like other people that are in that community as well. And like, how do I approach that responsibility in a way so that I don't do harm to the people I'm trying to work with? So a couple of ideas for ethics and practice. So I just want to kind of share like what I use to help me start this dialogue within myself. So we each all have our own set of ethics. Like I talked about, there's these 3 buckets that are kind of out there. And for me, I use the NPPA code of ethics along with my personal code to guide me. And so some of the things that, like I mentioned, the NPPA code is something that a lot of American journalists use. It becomes a common language across multiple newsrooms. So if you're going from one job to another, the same code applies. If you're a freelancer working for somebody, that code applies. And it just gives you a nice baseline to have a common set of language and understanding to start from. It doesn't mean you have to agree with everything, but it does help you start the conversations that you feel need to have to happen, especially when you're talking to an editor. So, and then I also have some of my own personal things that I put in here as well. Like, people give us permission to share their stories. So we need to honor that trust. That's really, really key. Getting permission is key as well. And not just getting like a yes out of somebody, but helping people understand what they're agreeing to and the impact it may have. So I've been on stories where I've gotten the yes, and I've had to have that scratching the back of my head going like, wait, do they really understand what they're agreeing to? Or do they know that people can Google their name and find this for years and years and years? So I have that conversation. I say, I just want you to make sure that you're not trying to do me a favor, but like you understand this has long-term impacts and here's some of the things that you might run into. Are you okay with that? Do you understand what you're agreeing to? I'll have that chat. I will pause. And sometimes people will say yes, and other times people will say, oh, I didn't think about that. Actually, maybe I shouldn't. And that's totally okay. And I don't want to find out a day or two later that someone says, oh, I regret giving you permission. That's the worst feeling because you can't recork that bottle once it's open. There's also the idea of the public trust and the transparency being very, very important to protect, right? That goes back to that idea of all we have is trust and credibility, and transparency is how we keep that intact. And then this other one, it's not really in anyone's code, but it's something I use, which is, I don't want to put my name on things that I don't feel like I did right by the story. So if I'm turning something in and I'm feeling iffy about it, my name means something to me, like it's attached to that. It doesn't mean that I'm not going to turn in my assignment. It means that I need to go work on it some more until I feel better about it. Or I need to have a conversation with my editor to say, I'm having this concern. I feel like I didn't get this right. Or I feel like I actually might do some harm in an unexpected way because I forgot to do something while I was out there. I think these are important chats to have because you're not all by yourself, especially when you work with an editor. You have somebody in your corner. Got ahead of myself there. Also, this idea of like using ethics as a tool, right? I've mentioned this a few times, and it's the tool that helps us like facilitate the questioning, the learning, the reflecting, and having the words to start those chats. And I think if you ask like 10 different journalists or 10 different newsrooms the same question about ethics, you might hear some of the same things that I'm saying, but you're also going to hear a variety of different things, and you're going to hear parts where people don't agree with each other. And I think that gets back to this idea that it's more of a rubric that's unique to each person in publication rather than a set of rules set in stone. So like, take this simple question of, is it okay to photograph or film children in public without express consent? If I asked you that question right now, you're probably thinking to yourself, it depends. And you probably have a series of questions that you want to ask me about what goes into this decision so that you can make the right decision. And that's actually exactly where you want to be, because it's not binary, right? Like, you need the information, you need the context, you need to understand the full, spectrum of what does this involve, how does it impact people, who's involved, who am I photographing, what's the importance of the news, does this picture need to exist? All these questions are lumped together. And for me, I've run into this situation a few times, but I'm thinking about a time a few years ago. So I was working on a story in Kashmir, and it was part of I've been working on this project about stateless on and off over the years. And I had traveled to Kashmir to meet the Rohingya people. They were refugees from Myanmar who had escaped and were trying to move west across India, just looking for any place that they can settle that would accept them. And they had eventually reached the India-Pakistan border in Kashmir. And in this region, it's a unique place because there's kind of like a no man's land of sort. This is where people that were forced out of Pakistan or India during partition, they kind of live around the border now, and they don't have citizenship to either nation. So that makes them de facto stateless. And in this band of limbo, that's where the Rohingya were arriving day by day, hoping to seek refuge. And when I was there, I used some of my so-so Hindi to speak with people living there. And I saw some children and I photographed them. But then I also try to like bridge the language gap with their parents and the cultural gap, because we're speaking some of the same broken Hindi, but culturally we're not the same. I'm an American person. I was born in America, but I'm Indian, but I'm very much American. Like when I speak in India, they hear my accent, even though I can't hear it. Um, and then they're also from Myanmar. They're actually not even Indian, but they're kind of adopting some of the language and customs as they travel across the country, and they're starting to learn like, oh, how do I interact with people here? So they're adopting some of that as well. And what I'm trying to do is, I'm trying to bridge these gaps. I want to make sure that I've had the chat to explain to them, like, why am I here? What am I doing here? Why am I trying to take pictures of your children? Are you okay with this? This is how I'm going to use the pictures. This is the story I'm working on. Making sure that they fully understand the entire context. And without these chats, I don't think I would feel even comfortable showing you guys these pictures today, or even publishing that story years ago. And there's actually like several photos I had never shown anybody. And it's because somebody either asked me not to, or I wasn't 100% confident that the folks I had spoken to fully understood me, or that I understood them. It goes both ways. There was also a little chance, there's like a little chance that people would even see these images, that like sometimes people don't have internet where they are. There's no mailing address. There's really no way for them to look up the story or even run across it. But that's not really the point. It doesn't really matter if the person never sees my images and they're not directly potentially harmed. It matters to me that I do the things in a way that treats everyone with respect. And as a partner who has given me permission to share their story, I show gratitude and reverence for that. So that stories are what makes us human. And for me, it just doesn't feel right when I don't take the extra effort to make sure that I'm doing it the right way. And ethics, again, are those rubrics that I can use to start checking myself in those moments, to be like, okay, am I doing everything I should be doing? Is there a question I should be asking? Am I making sure that this person's actually bought in and understands what's happening and why I'm here? And, the key thing to take away is that there's a power that we have, and we have to learn how to wield that power properly. I'm not going to say the Spider-Man quote, but if I've said it, so you've thought about it, so I don't have to say it now. But we have to lean on our ethics to help us lead to examining our practices. So you need to be both kind of a shepherd and part of the flock, like teach and guide people through how the media works and the impact of our images, but also listen to them and hear what they're saying. So I make it a point to always say, you don't have to talk to me. You don't have to say yes. If you do say yes and you change your mind, you can. If I ask you a question you don't want to answer, you can say I don't want to answer it. Like, you don't owe me anything. And I make that very explicit because when I leave that assignment, I feel better about knowing that I didn't trick somebody or make them do something that they weren't comfortable with, or to have them go home later that night and kind of second guess if they should have done that or not. I leave my phone number and email with them as well and say, look, I'm not going to publish this for like 2 weeks. If you change your mind tomorrow morning, let me know. I will send you an email when the story is done if you want to see it. Like, I don't, it's like a picture taker versus a picture maker. I want to be a picture maker, not a taker. So the big question, right? So like, what happens when ethics are in conflict? And ethics do run into conflict. Like, my example with the tea was a very small example of conflict. But in that case, I was able to navigate it by talking to my editor about why I made the choices I made and how the tea didn't compromise my story. And in that case, the editor agreed because it was a pretty small, minor issue. But what happens when that conflict is larger? Like, an editor doesn't agree with you fundamentally. There's a breaking news requirement that doesn't let you slow down and do things the way you would like to do. Maybe there's a social media editor who is taking your photo and pairing it up with a headline that you don't agree with, or recasting it in another context. There are like these business need asks that newsrooms have, and there are different people that touch your work along the way where these conflicts can sometimes emerge. And what happens when what do you do when that happens? How do you start those conversations? Like, how do you navigate that? And I think that's a very difficult thing that has to be kind of learned until you build that muscle to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it is uncomfortable to go to somebody who maybe hired you for an assignment and you're a freelancer, and you wonder, well, if I say something, what if they don't call me again? Like, these are real things. So when an editor might pair an image with a headline you don't agree with, or someone rewrites your caption, reframes your understanding of what you witnessed, and then once your story is published, the social media editor is pushing it out in a way you don't like the way you start these chats is you got to both understand the journalistic reasons, but also the business decisions that led to that, so that you can share that language, understand their perspective of what's happened here, and then you can leverage that to get what you want. So they might say to you, oh, it's proven this works, this gets clicks, or we don't agree with you. And so what you can do in that situation is, well, let me back up. So like, what happens in these situations is that you're going to start to see a lot of weird stuff online with your work. Like, you're going to start to see question headlines that don't actually say anything, but it's got a question mark on it, so you get away with stuff. You're also going to see sometimes your photos being recast in a different light, and it's not really true at all. Like, so for example, this example here is from in 2020. Seattle had this part of the city that became known as Chaz or Chop, depending on when you learned about it. And it was this part of the city where the police had abandoned it, and protesters were kind of squatting in, and it was largely peaceful. But the way, this is from Fox News, the way they portrayed it was chaos. And they had this photo saying that, it's an anarchist zone. City is on fire, it's burning. The problem is this photo is not from Seattle. It's actually from St. Louis, or I'm sorry, St. Paul, Minnesota. So what they had done was take a photo from a completely different incident, paired it with a headline called Crazy Town. And when you see these kind of things happen, I think it's our duty to speak up and to start that conversation with editors. But also when we see other people doing it, like in this example of Fox here, the industry did speak up. I think I saw a lot of my peers speaking up about, hey, wait a minute, that's not how we operate. That's not how journalism works. Like, this, what Fox News has done here is changing the public perception of what journalism does. And by extension, it harms all of us. It erodes trust in the entire industry. So ethics isn't just about what you're doing. It's about, like, speaking up when you see these things. It's actually our duty to speak up because we have to protect journalism as a whole. And, so during my time as an editor and department head at various publications, I've had to remind myself that I have to speak up too, and have these chats very often, start those conversations. And it could be very difficult. One trick I've learned is I approach them as collaborations. So I take this perspective of helping someone see a blind spot they may not be aware of, helping to educate of the dangers of, if we do this, this is why it might be wrong, or this is how it might do harm, and might be the conclusion of it. And here are examples of in the past where these mistakes have been made. I try to approach it as a collaborator and not so much "you're wrong, agree with me," because that just puts everyone's defenses up, and it doesn't get you the outcome you want. So, I speak about the trust we're jeopardizing. I speak about the journalistic values of our organization. I talk about the public good we're failing to deliver on. And I remind everyone I talk to, like, we have this responsibility. It's a privilege to work in a profession where my job is to be curious about the world, where doors open for me if I have a question, where I can call up people in power and say, why is this happening? Help me understand it, or this community is worried about something. What are we going to do for them? I have that power, but that means I also have that responsibility to respect that power and to do right by it. And I've had these awkward chats with a lot of editors over my career where it hasn't always been easy, and it could definitely get heated. And there are moments when the temperatures do boil over. And if you're listening to this and you're like, I've never had this conversation yet, one day you will. So don't worry, it's coming. And it's a good thing, actually. That means you care enough to have these conversations. And for me, one time I had this chat was actually in 2015 in Baltimore. There was a young man named Freddie Gray who was detained by police, and during transport had sustained life-threatening injuries to his spinal cord and ended up passing away. He died. Passing away is a euphemism, but we should say he died as journalists. Be clear. Sorry. Yeah, so he died, and the medical examiners that were looking at him said, this doesn't look like an accident. It looks like homicide to them, and that there were 6 officers potentially involved in this. And so following that news, people took to the streets, and it was largely peaceful protesters in the streets. There was a church locally that had organized people to march in the streets. A lot of older people, a lot of retirees, a lot of adults were marching in the street very, very peacefully. And I had people out there working on this assignment. They were confirming on the ground, this is what's happening. I had the wire services open in a tab on my computer. I could see what the AP and the Getty were bringing in. I could see the reality on the ground. And things changed around about 2 or 3 o'clock that afternoon. And that was because high school had let out. And so now you had a lot of young people in the streets coming out of school. And for a moment, it turned violent. And when that violence erupted, there were young, mostly Black, men and women in this community, and there were images coming into the wires and across social media of young Black men stomping on police cars, setting stores on fire, vandalizing. And I get a call from my editor saying, "Hey, Baltimore is burning. Give me pictures. I need a slideshow. We need to get on this." And I'm sitting there looking and saying, "I've been on this story all morning. This is a window of about 15 minutes. You can't let that 15-minute window define the story of the day. Yes, it is a part of it. Don't ignore it, but don't let that be the only slice of the story you tell." And that was something I felt strongly about, because I said, look, when you put up this trope of young Black kids stomping in a police car, people who see that are confirming their biases of, yep, that's how young Black kids act. Like, it's a trope that's very harmful, and it's not accurate at all. Like, I know for a fact it's not accurate, because I sat there watching this story unfold all day long. And the missing part of all this was also, as these young people were doing this, parents were coming out, and there were images like of moms grabbing their kids by the ear and dragging them home, taking them by the hand, taking them home, putting them on the sidewalk and saying, "Don't do this." Like, this was a reality. But the way it was being presented was, no, no, no. Baltimore is on fire. The kids are out of control. It's a riot. And that wasn't at all true. So I tried to balance it out. We wanted a slideshow, but I wanted to balance it out and say, look, I'm going to give you the whole story. I'm going to give you all the slices of, all the vignettes that made up this day. And that'll help us paint a truer picture of what actually happened versus the most dramatic image that you might see on social media and saying, yep, that's the story of the day. And that is not the story of the day. And so, we got into it, and it wasn't it wasn't the friendliest of chats. I mean, I had a person yelling in my face, spit flying everywhere, but I had to kind of tell them, this is where I'm coming from. Let me articulate for you. Let me use my codes to articulate the words I need to help understand my perspective of what I'm concerned about. And let's try to compromise in some way. And so I used, my MPPA code of ethics. I used my personal ethics. I used guidelines from the AP style book. I try to find the common language so we can start this conversation and have these open-ended questions. Now, meanwhile, this is also breaking news, right? So there's this time element to it that says, "Stop talking to me, Shaminder. Let's get on with it. Why are you being difficult?" And we did find our compromise in the end. And in hindsight, like a day or two later, we talked about it, and he was appreciative that I made that call in the moment, but that was 2 days later. In the moment, it was, "You're a bleep hole." So so it can go that way, right? It could be very difficult to have those chats, but you got to think about long term. It's uncomfortable today, but 2 days from now, when things are calm, try to get some coffee with that person and talk it through and say, "Look, this is where I was coming from. I think we should learn from this for the next time something like that happens." So we build that trust with each other, so that when I bring up a concern, we're on the same page with each other. All right, so I'm gonna try to give you guys a few like best tips for working with an editor. These aren't easy conversations, but they're important ones to have. And a code of ethics is a starting point for that discussion. It's also key to have good communication with your editor so that they can help you navigate your ethical issues that you run into, but also so they can understand what you saw and experienced and then advocate on your behalf. So empower your editors through trust and good communication. Arm them with the information they need. Help them look out for the issues that you're concerned about so they know how to respond. I've had a lot of times where I've hired people who have gone out, and I always have this chat with them of saying, "Okay, you're on the ground. I'm not. I need you to be my eyes and ears. I need you to communicate to me if what the assignment is asking for doesn't match reality." And what I've learned is that not a lot of editors do this, which is kind of odd to me. Maybe it's because I've worked as a photojournalist and an editor, so I've been on both sides, where I appreciate that someone has said that to me. I don't know. I'm probably speculating here, but that's just the thing I've noticed. When I tell people this, their first reaction is always like, "Oh, you actually care what I think." Okay, which is really odd to me, but that's the reality I've experienced. So anyway, long story short, like, I've sent people out, and sometimes they have said, "Hey, what I saw doesn't match what the writer is asking in this photo request for, or what you thought the story should be." And we talk about it, and then that gives me the information I need so that I can go back up the chain and say that we're going to go with photo A and not B, and here's why. And I know photo B matches the trope in your head you have, or the pre-visualized image that you wanted, but it's not true. it's just a cliche, it's a stereotype, it's based on this idea of, oh, it should look like that versus it does look like that. And so that helps give me the knowledge I need to go into that meeting and say, no, no, A is the reason, and this is why. This is what was on the ground. This is what we saw. This is what's actually happening. This is more true to the story. This is more informative for the public. This is the better record of history, right? We're writing the first draft of history in a lot of ways. So that responsibility to get it right is very important. And then, yes, so just communicate, but also keep an open mind. So we're constantly learning as new information comes to us, and we self-check our blind spots, we examine our ethics, we help each other check our blind spots. And ultimately, like, we just use our ethics as they keep evolving to help us grow and keep up with changing technologies, cultures, and other norms. But our core ethics are always there to help us interpret whatever comes next and to help us ask the right questions. And learning how to start having those conversations are where ethics are in conflict is very key, and it'll serve you well in the long run. All right, so where do you go from here? All right, so since ethics are fluid and a code is a starting point for a conversation that needs to happen in our practice, it's key that we seek out other perspectives and feedback when you run into issues. This is the best part of photo editing, actually, being able to dive in and break down things that we love, similar to what we're doing today, where I'm like, I'm so glad I get to nerd out about ethics with all of you. You don't get to do this in everyday life, even in a newsroom. So, like, how do you start? Like, if your editor isn't helping as much as you would like, what else can you do, right? So you can talk to your peers. You can talk to other editors. If you're a photojournalist, turn to the MPPA. Full disclosure, I'm with the MPPA, so I might be a little biased, but it is an amazing organization that you should check out if you're struggling with this stuff and you just want someone to talk to. Also, heck, just email me. If you can't find anybody else, email me. I love talking about this stuff. I would just love to help you navigate what you're struggling with. So, as a fallback, I'm always there. And I think, like I said, the most powerful thing you can always say is, does this sound right? Like, invite that conversation, or I don't know, and just embrace that learning in that discussion. Remind yourself to be humble, that you are in a line of work where you have this luxury and this responsibility about doing right by the public and the world around you. And so, yeah, so, in closing, I think if there's one idea I could leave you all with, it's that ethics are bigger than any one person, any one project, any one assignment, or any one interaction with an editor. It's that larger responsibility that we all have. That responsibility to ourselves, to the public that allows us into their lives, gives us permission to share their stories, to the public to build trust and empower their informed decisions about the world, and to our peers and editors to reinforce the bedrock of journalism and demonstrate the merits and the public good that come with a free press. And that's it. So please bring me your questions. I'm looking forward to this.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much for that, Shaminder. I think it was a really, really interesting talk and a really, really great to hear your perspective. Just a reminder to all the attendees, please do pop your questions in the Q&A box. But if it's okay with everybody, I'd like to kick us off with a question. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit, because you mentioned how rage bait and AI and things, that the metric is engagement. And I was wondering, how can ethical photojournalism best compete for engagement with things like rage bait and AI that can be so quickly churned out?
Yeah, I think it's a tough one, because, like, AI, we're still kind of trying to figure out, is it a tool? Is it a threat? Is it something that's going to disappear? Like, I think we're still trying to sort out exactly how to deal with AI. AI is also just the newest name for this. I mean, like, deep fakes have been a thing for a while, photoshopping things have been a thing for a while. So, like, I think all AI has done is just made it easier to do this and to distribute it. But those core ideas of, like, how do we talk about this to educate media literacy, right? Like, how do we help people understand this is not real, or this has value, or this doesn't have value? And I think that's the main challenge here. When I say that missing part of ethics that we don't talk about is that public media literacy component, I think that is the key. I think we need to spend a little more time thinking about, how do we better explain what we do? I think a lot of people don't even understand what we do. Like there's this idea of, oh, you guys are like the paparazzi. You guys harass people, or oh, you guys like this. You see a movie, and in the movie, there's a photographer who's just kind of like, by any means necessary, I got to get that photo. Be damned who gets in my way. And the reality is, none of us operate that way. But when that is the trope that is out there, that becomes the truth, even if it's not the truth. And when you think about things like rage bait, I mean, it is engagement is the key metric because it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It matters that you watched it. It matters that you clicked on it. It matters that you commented on it. And when you start monetizing that, you can see why it can run amok very quickly. I don't know if I have a satisfying answer for how do we combat that, other than to say we got to do a better job of showing the value of journalism. Like if someone, I want to see Rage Bait become like the store brand cereal that no one picks up. Like I want us to be the brand name cereal on the shelf. But how do we get there is a very tough question. And I don't know if I have the answers. I think the answer is, this is my theory, is how do we figure out a better way to talk about it and to explain the value of journalism and instill some media literacy among the people who are consuming this. But how do we get there is a very open-ended question. And I would love to tackle that with anybody who's interested.
That's a great answer. I think Helene is just reminding us to stop the slide share, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Helene.
How do I do that? Do I just
There should be do you see
Oh,
green?
here we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do I? Okay.
Which will,
Technology is so here it is. The big red button that
there you
says
are.
stop
Perfect.
sharing.
That's great. Thanks for the
Okay.
reminder, Helene. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, pop them in the chat. I think you wowed everybody into silence, but I mean, I can keep going with questions here as well. So,
Please. Come
but
on. Let's
I
let's
think
nerd out about ethics, guys. Let's go.
we've got one in the chat here. Just a reminder, if you can pop them in the Q&A box, it's easier for us to see them. But we have one in the chat here that says, there are those who divide the world into two types of people, those who don't. Oh, who divide the world into two, sorry, very dyslexic. Do you think that there are two types of photographers, those who take photographs and their ethics are based on empathy, and those who make photographs whose ethics are built on compassion?
Um, I think I need to unpack it because I think from my perspective, when I use phrases like, are you a photo maker or a photo taker? I don't view it as a taker is someone who photographs with empathy, and a maker is someone who photographs with compassion. To me, it's a difference of, a taker is a person who says, this image is going to help me look better. I've seen photographers say, see somebody crying, try to hide their face from the camera, and they move their hand down and say, no, no, it's a good picture. That is the most disgusting, repulsive thing I've ever seen. And I saw that 10 years ago, and it still sticks with me. But I'm like, I never want to be that person. I never want to work with a person like that, because that person doesn't need your camera in their face. They're saying, give me some space. And for you to say, no, this is about me. I'm a photo taker. This is a good photo. I don't care how you're feeling. This is about me right now. That is something that I just hate completely. And I think that is, the more people that are out there doing that kind of stuff is also hurting how the public views the value of what we do, because it's like, oh, look, by any means necessary, get the photo. So when I use phrases like photo taker, photo maker, a photo maker is a collaboration. You make a photo with somebody, you care about how they're feeling, you show compassion and empathy, you take the time to understand the spectrum of the story. You're not an advocate. I don't want to blur the line here. You're not an advocate. It doesn't mean that you agree with what they're talking about, or that that you're rooting for what they're talking about. You're not taking a side, but you are showing the compassion and the space and the reverence towards that person to say, you've allowed me to be here. You've allowed me to share your story. I'm gonna treat that with respect that it deserves. So that's when I say a photo maker, it's that collaborative process and everything that comes from taking the time to do it with care and respect. When I say photo taker, it's that person saying, no, no, move your hand. It's a good photo. And so that's kind of what when I use those terms, that's what I mean. So I would hope that there are only like 10% of photo takers out there, because our industry is very small, and believe me, everyone talks to each other. So those bad habits and bad actors don't last long, honestly. uh it's the people who actually care, and this job doesn't pay much anyway, so if you don't care, I don't know why you're here.
No, I think that's a very helpful distinction there. Thanks very much for that. A question from Mark here says, I am an activist photographer, not a photojournalist. I work with and on behalf of NGOs and organizations who work for equity and justice. Do you know of photo ethics guidelines for this subset of photographers?
I would say everything I've talked about would still apply to you. Just because you're working in a different field of photography doesn't mean that those same core principles don't apply to you. Like, you're working for an NGO, so they do have a perspective and an agenda. But when you approach your work, I would ask, can I believe what you're putting out there? Is this propaganda or journalism? Or documentary, if you prefer that term. Like, fundamentally, I think the NGO is hiring people who have a journalism background or are experienced with it, or people like yourself who come to it from this perspective of documentary. I think the reason that NGOs hire folks like that is that they want that layer of good ethics and truth in the images you're taking. Like, these aren't faked images, these aren't propaganda images, these are genuine things that have happened, because learning about the issues is more important than trying to fabricate an image. And I think it would undermine everything if the public found out that this NGO has been doing photo ops instead of real things, or like passing off, manufactured stories with fake names and actors and stuff. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think I would say, if your question is there a different set of ethics for that? I would say no, because fundamentally, you are still in search of the truth. You're still in search of using this tool of a camera to capture things that as they're really happening and tell that story truthfully.
That's a really good response. That was very good. That's great. And Mark agrees. He says that that was a great answer. So,
Oh man, awesome. Thanks, Mark.
um, can I ask a question as well? Because there was something that Danielle Villasana said last week about um, when she was in a situation in which there was an issue where she was wanting to like split the cab fare with
Mm,
somebody that she was working with. Um, and she was going the same direction. They were going the same direction. The person that she was working with was had
yeah.
very limited means. And so she
Mm,
asked her editor, can I split it? And she was told no. So I think that's an interesting inverse of maybe the
mm,
situation that you were talking about accepting a ride.
mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if you could maybe talk about that, but relatedly as well. Sorry, this is a pair
Yeah.
of questions. I was thinking about the cup of tea example as well. And I was thinking
Yeah.
about, because we've talked a lot in the past 3 weeks, 2 weeks about positionality. And I was thinking about as well, when you were saying that if you rejected a cup of tea, that it would be viewed as being very rude. And I wondered if that
Mm-hmm.
is different because of your positionality as an Indian American man. And
Right.
you know what I mean? So I guess this is all about, I guess, money and favor
Yeah.
and things and how you
Yeah. Yeah.
like, could you unpack any of that?
I will attempt to, yes. So so I think you're right. The tea example was very unique to me, because if it was anybody, if you were in that room, they wouldn't have that expectation of you accepting the tea. They would just assume you don't understand the custom. But with me, it would be like, he should understand the custom. He probably does understand the custom, and this is kind of like a rudeness, that, or an insult almost. And so it's a different dynamic, right? And that's when I say your personal ethics are like the things that you bring with you. It's that is the cultural background I'm bringing with me to the table, where I see something that I would run into, that if you were in that situation, it would be very different. So, and I think that what I was saying earlier of like having the way of starting these conversations is like a combination of these like three, I called them buckets earlier. But it's like kind of leaning into, how do I articulate this? Not just say I don't like it, but how do I help someone else understand the perspective I'm coming from? So like, and I don't know about all the details around the cab and the cab fare and splitting the fare. There might have been some other things going on there that I'm not aware of, but on the surface, from just what you said to me today, it sounds to me like she was on her way to somewhere. The person she was working with has also had to go to the same place. So the question was, can I split the cab fare? And the editor said no. I think I would ask that editor. It's like, why? Like, it doesn't change anything whether they're sitting there or not. The cab is still going the same place. I'm not doing anything different than what I would normally do. Um, is it a question of who's paying? Because maybe I should just pay. They shouldn't have to pay anything, and if they are of limited means anyway, and I feel like I want to do half because of that reason, why don't I just do it all and not make it an issue? I would try to have that conversation with my editor, because I'm pretty sure there are some newsroom ethics involved. Maybe there's some that editor might feel a certain way about things, but I think it's worth the conversation, because that might not be the first time you run into that situation. So you kind of want to have some idea of, what do I do next time that happens? Um, I know that's probably not the most satisfying of answers, but
Oh, it
it's
is
hard because there's so many nuances to all this.
I think in that, just for clarification, I think in that example, the issue was that it was viewed as potentially a breach of, like not paying for participation, paying participants or your
Oh, I see
traffic.
what you're
So
saying.
it was viewed
Yeah.
as a breach of a potential, I guess,
Like
influence
almost
over their
almost like
consent.
payola, or
Yeah,
yeah, I see
yeah,
what you're saying.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can't say, coming at it fresh from the outset without having a chance to talk with everybody, I wouldn't be able to say like definitively, here's what I would have done or anything right now, but I would
Yeah.
have a lot of questions. I think I would just want to know more about what's happening. And, you know, yeah.
Absolutely. So we have another question here. On do you have an example where newsroom or client ethics eclipse personal ethics?
Oh, I'm sure I do. Newsroom or newsroom ethics supersede personal ethics. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think of a good example. I'm sure I do. I'm trying to
Example's
think of an
hard on
example
the
that won't get
spot.
me in
Sorry.
trouble, actually. um, okay, I can't point to any specific example off the top of my head, but I can tell you it does happen. And similar to what happened after that incident in Baltimore, where I talked to the editor about a couple of days later, sometimes you don't get your way in the moment. Sometimes you get, no one agrees with you, or you don't even feel like you've been heard properly, and everyone's moved on. I think it helps to come back a few days later when cooler heads can prevail to say, hey, can I talk to you about what happened the other day, and make it a collaboration. If you approach it as, you know, you you're a blah 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 and you bleeped me, its defense is up. Nothing good will come of that. But if you come to them and say, hey, this happened the other day, it's been kind of bugging me a little bit. Can we talk about it? I kind of want to learn how to approach it next time in a different way, and I want you to kind of see the perspective I was coming from. Like, let's talk, let me understand your perspective. Like, maybe there's something I'm not seeing, maybe I have a blind spot. Like, let's talk it through. That's probably how I would approach that. Example wise, I mean, I can think of a few, but I don't want to say it on the record. And I'm sure you all understand why, because I have a little button in the corner saying this is being recorded.
Absolutely. No, that's grand. Thanks very much. And just one more question. What are your thoughts on helping your subject out? So Jeff here has commented about doing a story about the experience of homelessness during COVID, and can you give your gloves to somebody if
Mm,
you need?
yeah, this reminds me of in preparation for this, I was trying to find examples of things I could talk about, and then I ended up cutting this out because I felt like we were getting too long. But there was a story about, so ethics, I think, keep evolving over time. And I remember when I was first starting out, I was hearing from people I looked like was trying to learn from, like people I looked up to that had done amazing work. And I remember this one person talking about a story where they followed migrants from the southern border of Mexico up to Los Angeles, and they traveled with a family, and they were documenting this family's journey. Midway through the story, they hit a point where the family had a medical emergency, and they were put in this position of, is it ethical for me to help them or not? If I help them, what does that mean for my story? You know, can I still work on my story if I help them? Because I'm supposed to be this idea of a fly in the wall, right? Like an unobserved observer. The idea being, it can't be pure documentary if I'm interacting and changing outcomes. Forgetting the fact that just being in the room changes everything. But that's kind of like that tenet that we kind of hold in the back of our head of, like, we're not supposed to do that. But then when real things happen and you're faced with that choice of, do I give gloves to this person who is freezing and needs my gloves so they can make it through the night, or this family needs medical care and I know how to get it for them, should I do it? These are those moments where I think, we face those tough choices about, like, what does this mean? And I think you have to lean on your personal ethics and your professional ethics to kind of have that internal dialogue to say, okay, if I do this, does that change my story in a way that I can't work on it anymore? Have I become too involved? And the answer will be different for everybody, because you need to be able to articulate all the ways that it didn't change or it did change. Because when you get challenged with that choice you made and you talk to it about an editor later, you need to be able to talk through, like, why you did what you did, or the situation you were in was very dire, and if I didn't do this, this would have happened, right? And I felt like that was more important, that I help this person, even if it means I can't continue on the story because this publication feels like now it's compromised. That's a choice you have to make, and you have to sit with that choice, because sometimes that could mean that you don't get to work in that assignment anymore. And this I was talking about with the person following the migrant family, he ended up helping the family and then didn't document them any further in that journey. Ended up finding another family and some other people to follow for the rest of the journey. And the reason he did that was that he felt like, well, once I took that step, I became too involved in the story. I changed the outcome. It didn't feel satisfying to continue with, because then people would question the validity of everything I report from that point forward. And so they were thinking about, how would the public perceive what I did? Not just the ethical issue. It is ethical, but like, it's also like all the way through, right? Not just with my editor being upset with me for doing something, but with the public then think my story is not as true as it is, because they'll say, well, look, he was involved, or he's an advocate, or he helped them, so this is all fake. Like, how important is that line to hold? And so it's different for every story, it's different for every situation. And I think the key thing is to invite that conversation with your editor. And if you don't have an editor and you're doing this independently, then other peers that you work with, have that chat internally using the language of a code to say, okay, does this actually make sense or not? And it's not a binary. Like, I can't sit here and say, yep, you're wrong, or you're right. Well, it's not that simple.
Absolutely. No, I think that's a brilliant note to end on. I think that idea of transparency and being able to articulate, how you make decisions is so key. So thank you very much for highlighting that. And thank you very much for your time, and to everybody for your questions. If you're in the workshop, we will see you in the other room momentarily. Thank you very much to everybody for attending, and thank you for attending all of the series, actually. So thanks very much, and have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.